Pete is going to moderate as a question time Fiona Bruce today. Over to you, Pete.
Thanks a lot for that, Anne-Marie. And good morning to you all from this wonderful building that we're in, or at least one of us is, Colin. The rest of us are a bit virtual. But anyway, my name is Dr. Peter Moforth. I'm Director of Indes. We're an e-commerce agency based in Glasgow. With me this morning, I have 4 members of the Scottish Parliament. While we're all aware that politicians are not expected to have specialist knowledge of the details of e-commerce, what we hope for is a shared understanding about how this huge sector might play a role in the future economy of Scotland by boosting productivity, creating new jobs, and helping exports. Let me start by introducing our first panel member, Colin Beattie. Colin is MSP for the Scottish National Party and represents the people of Midlothian North and Musselburgh. I was with Colin on the Holyrood Economy and Fair Work Committee, where he was investigating the changing nature of retail trade, along with its impact on the high street. I've not seen a shaking of the head, so hopefully that's all correct. On his Twitter account, he's raised the problem of a lack of grit. Well, today we'll have the chance for him to prove us wrong. The second panel guest that we have is Willie Rennie. Willie is the Scottish Liberal Democrats member for North East Fife. Willie was leader of the Scottish Lib Dems from 2011 to 2021 and is currently their spokesperson for education, economy and communities. Perhaps the highlight of his professional career was being runner-up in the 2006 Scottish Coal Carrying Championships held in Kelty. We'll clearly have to come to you first should we have a question about e-commerce sustainability and carbon footprint. Our third panelist is Stephen Kerr, MSP for the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Stephen is Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills in Scotland. From a Google search, I can see that he's actually uttered the E word at Holyrood, so he'll be well prepared for today's event. Importantly, Stephen has recently been on BBC Question Time, so he'll be able to give me feedback on my dismal performance compared to Fiona Bruce. Last, but certainly not least, we're pleased to welcome Daniel Johnson, MSP for the Scottish Labour Party and representing Edinburgh Southern. Daniel has in the past been group manager of various high street shops, including Paper Tiger and Studio One. He is an independent thinker who openly challenged the Labour Party over its stance on Brexit. In his spare time, he enjoys playing the guitar and DIY. So, Daniel, I think we're going to get on fine. So, without further ado, let's get straight to our first question, which I think is about skills and training. The question comes from Gus Grubb from the City of Glasgow College, where Gus is the Dean of Faculty. Over to you, Gus.
Thank you, Peter, and a very good morning, panel, and thank you for taking my question this morning. I'm sure you're aware of the financial footprint that e-commerce brings to Scotland, and I personally believe it's a great opportunity just now for the Scottish Government and e-commerce to capitalise on that growth. Again, I'm sure you're also familiar with some of the following: the Scottish Government's Digital Skills Strategy, the Future Skills Action Plan, the Fair Work Employability Skills Directorate, which are all directed to supporting the National Economic Strategy. So again, these are just a couple of examples of which are skills focused and economically driven. So my question is, taking all of the aforementioned into account, is now the right time for the Scottish Government to develop an e-commerce strategy for Scotland? Thank you.
Okay, but just before we throw this open to the MSPs, coming from a different angle, obviously Gus is coming from the higher education and further education sector. I'd like to bring in John Nixon, who is the e-commerce director at Scott Direct. Somebody else just joined, which is part of the Scott Group, one of Scotland's largest and most successful companies. Scott Direct sells tools, workwear and PPE. Over to you, John.
Morning, everyone. One of the things that I'm quite passionate about is e-commerce skills and training. It's a major problem for most companies within e-commerce. As far as I'm aware, there's no qualification anywhere in Scotland on e-commerce, so we always end up having to train our own staff ourselves. Now, e-commerce is hard, it's technically difficult, and most courses that I see are for marketing and social media. They are not true e-commerce or e-commerce marketing, which is totally different. I know colleges have tried their best to organise courses using their own, staff and academic staff. The problem for many of us, I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm probably speaking for the wider community, is when they use their own staff, our own staff know more about the subject. So it doesn't make sense for me or others to put staff on a course when we actually know more than the people who are taking the course. It's pointless. If the government really wants to help, then would it be possible to have training courses taken by experienced, knowledgeable people who work within e-commerce, or use some sort of grant/voucher scheme that could be used to get trained by hands-on experts that are already up to speed on the subject? Do you think it would be possible, and what needs to happen to make that work?
Fantastic. What I'd like to do now is to take you in order, but I'm sure there'll be lots of overlapping. Maybe if I can start off with Stephen, who's keenly interested in education, to answer those points.
Well, I think it's right to say that there is no recognised course or qualification for e-commerce in Scotland. I think there's a problem in general in matching up the demands of business in general with what educational institutions are prepared to offer. And there needs to be some shaping of that. So there was a lot of mention in Gus's question about strategy documents and reviews. I'm afraid that's something we do really well in Scotland. We have loads of reviews. I mean, one of the things that amazes me about the education and skills landscape in general is just what a blob it is. And actually got to break through all of that and actually start to deliver on the stuff that you're mentioning. So I think who delivers the sort of training that you mentioned, John? You mentioned the fact that the people in the educational sphere probably aren't in a position to do it. And there are people that can. The problem with that is the people that can are doing it. And they're usually doing it in a business context already. And taking them and getting those people to be drawn out of that context into an educational institution is quite difficult. So I think the answer probably is something along the lines of a voucher. I think giving businesses, particularly SMEs, grants, giving them the financial means to be able to buy that knowledge, that expertise that you're describing, I think would be one way to go. But it would need to be the private sector, I think, that would provide that rather than the colleges and universities in the first instance. I'm actually quite critical of big businesses in this respect, because one of the things I did when I was an MP is I set up an all-party parliamentary group at Westminster on professional sales, because sales in general, there's very little training for sales in general, let alone e-commerce selling. And big businesses need to lead the way on this. They need to buy in to institutional courses, institutional learning. They need to shape the agenda, and then the SMEs can come behind that. But I think the idea of providing grants and then seeing the development of some form of private sector consultancy on the back of that, I think that would be a good way to go. But we need to do something in general about reshaping the educational landscape so that it meets the needs of business, and business it all needs to be demand led.
Okay, thanks for that, Stephen. Colin, do you agree with that, or do you take a different line?
Well, I think I can partially agree with what Stephen's saying there. There is certainly a big gap in the provision of training for e-commerce. And I know from talking to various businesses and trade groups and so on, the vast majority of the training is done in-house. And the reason is very simple, of course, that's where the skills are. The skills are not in the colleges and in the universities and so on at this time. Now, you can argue that they need to be developed there. Scotland underperforms compared to the rest of the UK in terms of the share of e-commerce. I mean, we've got less than 2% of the market. And there's many reasons for that. Partly it's a question of scale, where the market is and so forth. But we can do much better in this. Now, Skills Development Scotland, for example, I think could be more active in this role. They do provide training, but the complaint I get is that the training is behind. It's behind the market. It's not keeping up. And this is a big problem in the technology market, is keeping your skills right up front there to be the most competitive in the market, because it's changing so quickly. And educational institutions historically have not been terribly good at keeping right to the forefront. And I think that a lot could be done there. So I think there's something to be done with our universities, our colleges, Skills Development Scotland. I think there needs to be more of a joined up approach to this, because at the moment it's very fragmented. E-commerce is still looked at as some sort of a new boy on the block, whereas it's not. It's well established, and it could be a boon for some of our high streets if we can make use of what they
absolutely
bricks and clicks,
Okay, no, really good, clearly made point, Colin. What's the view of the Lib Dems, Willie?
So yes, their strategy, and the strategy is helpful, despite what Stephen says. A strategy can be helpful in just setting a sense of direction and targets, and it does focus people's minds, and usually money flows with it. Where I agree with Stephen is that we just debate these things forever. We never actually get to the point of delivery. I mean, there's one underlying problem with the whole sales agenda just now, is the landscape. The reform process started in 2017 and it's not finished yet. And the colleges haven't been given a clear direction about their future after the sustainability review from the Funding Council. So the whole sector is in limbo just now, and there is no sense of direction. So what you're feeling is what everybody else is feeling. So I think that's right. And can I just comment? I think that's the first time I've ever heard an SNP representative say that Scotland isn't as good as the rest of the UK on something. I think we should mark this moment.
That's data and statistics. No, well-made point, Willie. But the point is correct, what Colin said.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I swiftly move on to Daniel?
I've waffled a bit. Can I get to just a couple of? I'm puzzled as to why you think the Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Borders College courses on e-commerce don't fit the bill. That's a question back to you. And secondly, we do have a problem with the SQA and colleges keeping up with modern developments on the needs of business. They are very slow, and that's a sector-wide problem again, and that's why we need to speed that up. And finally, there is an issue about private individual trainers managing to get a bit of a market compared with colleges from Skills Development Scotland, and that might help some of your individual problems.
Okay, I mean, just to answer on that particular point, I think the Borders College advertised a course, but I'm not sure whether it ran or not. Maybe somebody who knows the answer to that could put it in as a chat. Anyway, what I'd like to do is to hand over to Daniel to get the view of the Labour Party on this.
Look, I'm going to attempt to agree with all my colleagues, but in different ways. But I think the thing I would say up front is that actually we need probably more than a strategy. Strategies are important, but we have too many of them. But I think actually the problem is that they all get one fundamental point wrong here, is that they treat technology as something separate. And it's not. When it comes to business, technology is like finance these days.
Yep. Simply
No business can attempt to actually go to market without thinking what its technology strategy is. Technology and actually, as I was preparing for this session, I was wondering whether or not even e-commerce is a relevant term anymore, because all business essentially needs to be e-commerce, and if it's not, it's going to die. And it really is as simple as that. So I think we need to be embedding technology actually as a core part of all our business strategies. I think we need to have it absolutely embedded right the way through our education system as well, and indeed in terms of our approach to government, rather than being treated as a bolt-on, something to think about after you've thought about the main parts of whatever strategy you're dealing with. And I think that's really fundamental. The point around delivery, I mean, I find this really frustrating because I think there's willingness, and I know Glasgow College is, you know, I've had lots of conversations with Paul Little. It wants to do more with partnership, but doesn't essentially have the ability to do so because of the way things are funded and organised. SDS is seen as a bit of a monolith, but then I talk to even people within SDS, and they would like to be more flexible. And we even have examples of where this works well. So Code Clan, time after time, is held up as this great example of, you know, how you can deliver skills in partnership between the state and private providers. But then we've only done it once. Essentially, the Scottish Government was involved in the startup of that, as then essentially talks about it, but, you know, it hasn't necessarily followed through on that partnership, and we haven't repeated it. So there's an example there. And I think the final point I would say this in terms of the provision, because I recognize the point, having been through this journey, taking my businesses online, is that the advice certainly at that point, and this is a while ago now, was so superficial. I mean, I mean, I was so much further down the line of understanding what I needed to do, and it was about implementation. So at one level, the advice is very superficial, but then also the skills are wrong. So that where there is skills provision and it's got depth, it tends to be in sort of hardcore coding and hardcore technology skills. Now, I was never going to be employing developers. What I wanted was the skills to actually do the integration. So it was about data preparation. It was about kind of actually the integration between the different platforms that we were using for the different parts of the business. So critically between, you know, bookkeeping software, e-commerce software, and till point software. Now, so these are kind of almost, for want of a better description, mid-level technology skills around integration, data preparation, and use of technology platforms as opposed to coding them. But I don't really feel that our educational setup really understands that technology perspective. It's very much either in, you know, thinking about user and presentational elements, or sort of hardcore coding, and it's actually that actually quite large bit in the chunk in the middle, which is where most businesses actually have the skills and struggle.
Okay, we've got 5 questions I'd like to get through. I'm surprised actually by the shared unity of view on lots of these points, which has been great.
Pete, sorry, Pete. Just a quick question. You mentioned the Borders College. We've looked at, basically, Laura's had a look at it as well. The course was developed by Borders College, but there was a lack of uptake initially. New staff are now looking to relaunch it and embed it in the current provision. So I think it comes down to the same thing we've discussed with the colleges before, and you've all mentioned, is the lack of use of private sector to input with the teaching of those things. And Daniel, I agree with there's a mid-level skills and the higher level skills that get more advanced as they move on within e-commerce that are kind of lacking the input from vouchers. Would be a good answer for that.
Okay.
But the problem is that like I was saying earlier, and I think it's been touched on by one of my colleagues, is that the institutions will respond to demand, but if big businesses take care of themselves, because they can buy in the expertise, they can buy in the systems that they need with the expertise that come with that, then that leaves SMEs behind. And increasingly, you know, when we talk about national productivity, we always end up talking about the long tail of SMEs. And one of the key drivers of improving our national productivity will be the adoption of new technologies, because that's how they're still described. So I think what we've got to do is have a specific focus on SMEs, and that's why I think John's got a point about the vouchers to get help to those businesses.
So this is really the opposite of the Logan report, which tends to focus on unicorn. What you're suggesting, Stephen, is that we focus more on the SMEs for whom e-commerce is a natural.
Because that's where
I think you need to recognise that's quite difficult. There have actually been a number of attempts, but actually it's quite difficult to land things that actually that can be used by SMEs. So I mean, I agree with the point, but there's also something quite challenging in actually delivering this.
Yeah. I'm very conscious of time here. Can Colin's put his hand up, and then I'll just take a point from Colin, and then I'll have to move on.
Yeah.
I just want to make a very quick point here. I don't altogether agree with what Daniel said about every business is going to have e-commerce. It's not suitable for everybody.
That's correct.
It'd be wonderful if it could, but if you're running a small retail operation in the middle of a town or village or whatever, and you've got your bricks and mortar around about you, you're doing your over-the-counter sales, and you're also trying to do a bit of e-commerce, you're limited in what you can do. You're limited in the skills that you'll have and able to acquire, and you're limited in the time, the physical time you've got to be able to run that business.
I couldn't disagree more, Colin. And I won't interrupt because I think we want to get through, but I hope they'll get a chance to explain why.
Okay, look,
I'm afraid that's wrong.
Yeah,
but this is fundamental.
The whole purpose of this was to get a discussion going. Boy, we've got it in spades, and hopefully there's going to be follow-up.
Peter, this is fundamental. We've got to believe that the solutions that e-commerce can bring to business are for all businesses. Yes. There's not a sector of our economy that can't benefit from an adoption of e-commerce. And so to say that there are some businesses for whom it's not relevant, frankly, those businesses themselves, if they don't become more multi-channel, more omni-channel, they will in turn, they will go to the wall.
It's like finance.
It's like small businesses. Omni-channel, a small retail business, it has no meaning. It's the physical capability of these businesses to be able to...
Can we expect, because this is an important point, can we expand on it a little bit? Because I agree with you, Colin, it's meaningless to them, but ultimately, it's not just about how you get to market, it's about how you organize your business as well. And quite frankly, if small businesses aren't accessing these things, they're just going to fall behind, and ultimately they're going to die. I mean, it is really that simple. And it is like finance. So yes, there's lots of small businesses that are bad at organizing their finances, but they're the ones that are actually going to struggle and die. So the ones that can't get their heads around technology and the appropriate way for them are going to fail.
Okay.
And that's the long-term reality. And having been around this and got the scars, I'm utterly convinced.
Okay, these are follow-up points. I have to draw a line at this point under this question and move on to our second questioner. Our second question is from Zishan Ashraf. Zishan is an entrepreneur who is also working within Shopify's revenue team, helping e-commerce businesses from the UK, Europe, and the Middle East grow. Over to you, Zishan.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel as well for making the time. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Peter and Anne, for putting this together. So, although it's great to see some involvement from the government in e-commerce, I find it astounding that the Scottish Government has no real data on which e-commerce businesses exist in Scotland. Une from Broxburn hit 200 million in sales last year, exporting their Pete Selvins all over the world. Snag Tights, another great example based out of Livingston, sell tights for plus-size women and are expected to hit 50 million in sales this year. In the years gone by, it was common to see bricks and mortar retailers turn to online, but now with the rise in customer acquisition costs, we are seeing that online businesses are taking their businesses omni-channel. Does the Scottish Government plan to do any reviews into e-commerce businesses, like Mark Logan's review into the tech ecosystem, to build a complete picture data set on the types and sizes of businesses which exist? If Scotland wants to lead in this space, we must build this data set, but secondly, incubate these businesses and offer them incentives for basing themselves in Scotland. With the high street dying a slow death, we must be able to provide these online juggernauts incentives for opening unique stores and leveraging in-store experiences and consequently helping our high streets too.
Okay, fantastic question. I know this is something that Colin's worked on extensively, so perhaps Colin, might like to take this question to start with.
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I think there are many solutions possible for our high streets. We just can't afford to lose the centres, the vibrant centres of our towns, cities, and villages, and we have to find a way of keeping them going. E-commerce is one way of keeping them alive, but it doesn't mean that each individual retail unit has to develop its own e-commerce product. You could, for example, have shared online platforms for local businesses, so that one site covers the whole of the high street, showcasing the shops and allowing people to buy products in that site, which would cut costs for the individual small retailers and still give them the exposure. Another way would be a virtual high street, where you've got online platforms. You've got Scotland Loves Local, for example. That could be expanded and developed. It enables consumers to spend money in local shops without losing the convenience of online shopping. So, there are innovative ways around this. However, I do think that I would encourage the Scottish Government to spend a bit of time investigating this, because I think there should be a review of e-commerce in Scotland. We are underperforming, and I think that's fairly clear. I said before, we have under 2% the UK share, although we don't have a great deal of data as to what that means and what that 2% is and how it's spread and where the priorities are. So there's a lot of work to be done on this, I think, to understand where we can put the effort and the resources into encouraging this. E-commerce is here to stay. It's going to develop. It's going to go from strength to strength, and it could be a strength for us if we can grab it at the right time and ride it. And
okay.
we have to help.
Okay, maybe before I get the views of the three other MSPs, we have a poll that we can quickly run and get some evidence from the audience, see what they think. So, if either in a separate web browser tab or in on your phone, you might want to log in using code 2511 for those people who joined late.
We can see the poll at the moment. You can see it live as people are putting results in, and that's coming up just now, 25-2 at the moment. Should e-commerce be a sector which is tracked by the UK by region? This would empower the Scottish Government to benchmark Scotland's performance versus the rest of the UK. That is our current results, Pete.
Okay.
So we'll keep an eye on that and come back to that later. Probably.
Okay. Okay. If I can, thanks, Colin. If I can ask the second MSP, can I ask Daniel? You've obviously had a lot of exposure to high street retail, and you can see what's going on. So, Daniel, what's your view?
I'm both. I mean, having taken my stores and probably had 2 failed attempts to get them. I mean, this is sort of 15 years ago, online successfully, and then literally the last project before I became an MSP. So in the last sort of 18 months of running the business, I re-platformed our business using Shopify as our e-commerce platform. With
funnily enough,
and iVend on our tailpoint. And I'm saying that because actually I think there's some misapprehensions. So I think Colin's right about the support. And if you look at Scotland's business makeup as a whole, essentially 90% of businesses in Scotland have had 0 productivity growth over the last two decades. And Stephen is absolutely right that actually the key to shifting that is actually about technology adoption by small businesses. And the simple reality is that shoppers don't want to know about businesses that aren't online. If you're looking for a business, whether it's about where to buy kind of a light bulb to, I've just been looking at a lot, like lots of people, about where I might be able to get, somebody to fit new windows in my drafty house. You start online. So I think it's about helping people and actually making that much easier, and actually also recognizing it's not necessarily the sort of the big technical things which are difficult. It's actually a lot of it, for a shop, getting your stuff online. It's not about getting the platform. That's easy. I mean, I could set up an e-commerce site probably in the time that we're having this session. But what I couldn't do is probably do all the photography and the words.
Yeah,
That's
and the marketing.
Time and the difficulty. So I think sort of understanding actually what the blockages are, and I don't think it's cost, and I don't think it's actually about the technical elements. A lot of it is actually the practical side of things. So I think we need kind of programs that deal with that now. And then ultimately on your polling point, I mean, I would say yes, that we need that data, but actually it probably needs to be a lot more granular than that. Actually, we don't really understand how we're doing in terms of e-commerce businesses between the different regions in Scotland, let alone between Scotland and the rest of the UK, we won't be able to understand the problem and where we need to support it. So really, we need to be actually thinking about how we help all consumer-facing businesses realize that platform. I mean, I think the technology point is broader than this, but actually, if you're a consumer-facing business, if you don't have a good online presence, even if you're not selling online, people won't know where you are.
Absolutely.
Or who you are.
Yeah.
Stephen, what's your view on this?
Yeah, so I just leap in and agree with Daniel about buying decisions. Buying decisions, I think nearly all buying decisions now begin online. All significant buying decisions definitely begin online. So on the issue of data, I mean, you need data to be able to have sound policy approaches. And one of the problems we've got in Scotland is the quality of our data. Just about in every field of policy you think of, the data is not adequate to purpose. Having a Scotland data set is not enough. I agree with Daniel on that as well. I think these issues need to be, we need to have a local approach to these things to deliver local solutions. We do know, and Colin said it earlier, we do know that Scotland is behind the rest of the UK. One of the measurements that's been shared with me in the past is the number of digital jobs in general that are advertised as being located in Scotland, where compared with other parts of the United Kingdom, we just don't do as well. And I was explaining to someone last night, we've got 4 kids, and none of our kids live and work in Scotland now, and that breaks my heart. And especially my wife's heart, because we can't get to our grandchildren easily. But behind that, there is a real structural problem in Scotland, and that is that we are not geared up to build the economy that we need to have that meets Kate Forbes' national strategy of economic transformation. You need to have digital skills to do that. And if you look in our schools, we just don't invest enough in digital skills in schools. Willie and I are on the education committee. We had Fergus Ewing as a colleague for a long time, and every session, regardless of the subject matter, he would bring up keyboard skills. He called it touch typing. Okay. But the fact is, we're giving kids devices, not as fast as I would like, but we don't show them how to get the best out of the devices we give them, and we certainly don't teach them how to develop advanced.
Point well made. Can I move on to Willie, who's been uncharacteristically a bit quiet, but I'm sure has a good view on this?
I'm a very modest, shy, retiring person, Peter. I'm sure you've come to understand that. I was sharing a taxi last night to the Herald Politician of the Year Awards with Ivan McKee, the business minister. So I took the opportunity at the back of the taxi where we were squeezed in. I said, "What are you doing about e-commerce? What did I say to them tomorrow?" And he said, "I'll be happy to meet with them at any point," he said. So if nothing else, we've managed to achieve that out of this. But he said there's quite a lot in the export strategy, the Trade and Nation document about e-commerce. And he did immediately say it was one of the priorities that they were trying to work up.
Yeah, so, his key focus at the moment is around these free green ports. So I've actually tried to contact him about this, and why on earth e-commerce doesn't even get a mention, whereas free ports in China, of course, have been pivotal to their entire export machine.
So anyway, let's speak after this meeting, Peter, and we can try and
cool. Okay, thanks. What I'd like to do, okay. I'm very conscious of
if you want to move on, I'll come back with other stuff later.
Okay. Look, we've got a lot to get through. Our third question, and it does pick up on some of the things that have already been said, is from Marianne Rutz. Marianne is a Swiss national based in Scotland and Switzerland. Marianne consults within the customer service sector. Recently, Marianne has been working with a number of retail e-commerce companies. Over to you, Marianne.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me and everybody else who was making the time. It's great. I love the discussion. So I'm really a little bit reluctant to ask my question.
Go for it, Marianne.
Because we are, e-commerce is really complex. I think everybody here agree. You need to get an excellent customer experience, because if it's not working, nobody will buy e-commerce again. So if you're not getting what you want from your experience, you will not touch the platform again. It's a lot around technology. We all agree it needs specific tools. Then there is another element we haven't touched upon yet, is online communication is different to what we do right here, just talking. So online communication experts and more. So e-commerce is complex. And my question to you, MSPs, please, is how does Scotland compare to other countries in Europe or worldwide in e-commerce? And what is the strategic plan for Scotland to learn, to exchange views, and to better ourselves?
Fantastic. Daniel, what's your view?
Well, look, I mean, here's the interesting contrast I think that we've got across the UK and in Scotland is that I think, we are, in terms of our user base, I mean, people use e-commerce much more than in other countries comparatively. So we've actually got quite a well-developed market. What we don't have, I think, is that technology-first approach. And I think, in other European countries, I think they're much further down the line. I mean, it's sort of almost trite to feel like Estonia, where technology is baked into everything. But I mean, I think in most other European countries, I think you see the embedding of technology. So I mean, which it repeats previous answers, but I think that's both the opportunity on the one hand in terms of the maturity of where we are with e-commerce, but I think we are not making the most of it in terms of developing the skills of our workforce and our young people.
Okay. Willie?
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add to what Daniel was saying. We don't really know, to be honest. We don't really know how we compare because we're not measuring. We don't have the strategy. We don't have the plan. And if we don't have all that, we can't really progress.
I mean, although we don't have measurements, there are third-party measurements that can be taken. And for example, the proportion of retail, we are double that of the United States across the UK. So we are an e-commerce powerhouse, the UK. It's just that Scotland seems to be a bit behind when you look at the data. Perhaps Colin, do you want to comment on this?
Absolutely. I think we are suffering from a lack of data everywhere. We know internationally for example, the EU, 24% of businesses sell by e-commerce within the EU, 20% outside of the EU. And they've got lots of challenges that they're facing, not the least being the exit of the UK from Brexit and the resultant tax issues around that, VAT getting slapped on coming into the UK, the paperwork that's around it, and so forth, which just led to, I think, a lot of problems, a lot of reduction in the trade, obviously, between the UK and Europe. Now, comparing to the UK is quite difficult, actually. I mean, 63% of businesses in the UK say they have made an e-commerce trade with other companies within the UK. We can't break it all up, though. We don't really have a knowledge of what our international profile is. It's just not there. We don't collect the data. Now, we in Scotland are reliant on data being collected centrally in the UK. And I think it would benefit us and it would benefit other regions in the UK if we understood the full 360 degrees of what e-commerce actually means to that region. And then we can have specific policies which will help develop and support e-commerce. And that's just not happening at the moment. I think we mustn't forget a huge chunk of the economy, the control over the economy is reserved to Westminster. Now, Scotland, we can support that with using skills.
We could be different, yeah.
With training in, all these things we can do, which will make a huge difference up here. But we have to know what we're going to do. We need a strategy on that. And that strategy has got to be based on good data that will
absolutely
us and which we can base these policies and these strategies on.
At the moment, we don't know what we don't know. So well made point, Colin. Stephen, I can see you shaking your head a bit. We've got some fact checking here just to make sure we're not dealing in fake news. Do you want to comment on that, Anne-Marie? Anyway, these are some measures on the size of e-commerce. I mean, the UK does punch well above its weight. People don't realise
it does. it does when it comes to the adoption of online services, online shopping, online business. It does. But that's not the same thing as I think that Marianne is asking. And I want to congratulate Colin Beattie for getting 45 minutes into this question time before he brought up constitutional politics. That's a record for any SNP representative
it's not
I've ever had the pleasure.
politics to state the facts on the economy.
That's how it came across. Let's blame Westminster, which is the famous and much reached for
not a
refrain
blame,
of
it was a factual statement.
SNP representatives. But
Okay.
can I say that how I would measure this is perhaps a little bit more basic, Marianne, and compare with the rest of Europe. I am embarrassed by how poor our digital infrastructure is in the UK in general. And I'm especially embarrassed about how poor it is in Scotland. You can hardly even get, well, you can't go anywhere in Scotland and be sure you're going to get even a mobile phone signal, let alone 3G, 4G or 5G. We need to invest a lot more in basic infrastructure. It is embarrassing that in Scotland, I think, I might be wrong in saying this, I will be gladly corrected, but Stirling, my old constituency, is the only city in Scotland that is fully connected with full fibre to every premise. And that is holding us back economically. So in terms of user adoption, in terms of business adoption of technology, fantastic. But if you don't get the basic infrastructure right, then you're hardly creating the conditions to encourage the sort of economic, ambitious economic development that we'd like to see in the realm of e-commerce in terms of Scotland's businesses. And one last point, if I might, Peter, and that is around school again. I'm coming back to school because these things are begun at school, and from the earliest possible age, you need to be teaching. And we don't have the teachers. We don't have the subject choice. We don't have, and by the way, that's not only true in digital space, but it's also true in languages as well. There you go. I got my words out.
There, you've made your point. Before moving on, just a quick answer from Colin, who's raised his hand on this.
Yeah, just a brief mention that in clarity, the Scottish Government's put £600 million additional into the rollout of broadband and digital technology across Scotland. That of course, the programme itself is in the hands of the UK government. So the Scottish government put that additional.
You shouldn't be so defensive, Colin.
No,
I know you're embarrassed by
look, we're going over with time. I hope we're not going to lose people as a consequence. But I'd like to now move on to our fourth question, because a lot of these overlap and bring up the same themes and issues. So my fourth question is from Jamie McDonough. Jamie is one of Scotland's serial entrepreneurs. He recently built from scratch, listen to this, an 8-figure turnover e-commerce business based in Scotland with over 70% of his sales in the beauty and healthcare market going to the United States. That deserves
brilliant.
A round of applause. Isn't that fantastic? Over to you, Jamie.
Just before you go to Jamie, there is going to be a Slido on this one as well, everybody. So just to let you know, we have a Slido question for this one as well.
Oh, are you going to put the Slido
I'll
first?
put it up for you quickly just to see.
Okay.
This is along the lines of Jamie's question, but if you want to start filling that in on your phones while you're listening in too. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Jamie, to ask your question. If people in the background can just be filling in the Slido. Thanks.
Sure. Let's get my question out of the way before you answer this. Nice to meet everybody. So I'll go ahead. In 2020, the UK government levied a 2% digital services tax on the revenues of large multinational digital companies that help facilitate online trade. So primarily Amazon, Google, Facebook, etc. On the same day that this tax was levied, Amazon increased all their fees from fulfillment to commission and ads by 2% to offset the new digital services tax. So knowing Amazon and how they operate, I saw this coming a mile away. So what happened in reality was that the government essentially taxed all the small businesses they intended to spare. And for me, it was around about, it still is around about £70,000 extra annual cost, which I could have used towards employing local people, whereas Amazon got off scot-free. It's worth noticing that there's around about 300,000 of these small sellers using Amazon in the UK. and Google and Facebook did the exact same thing with their fees. So the result has been extremely damaging and essentially killing awful lot of small businesses, and some of my friends in e-commerce have recently failed. So my question is, number one, and this is primarily to Stephen, as it was your party that put it in place, do you recognise that the DST was badly implemented? And number two, are any of you at Holyrood planning on damaging other small businesses in a similar way with another badly thought out tax for Scottish small businesses?
Whoa. Doesn't mince his words, does he? Stephen, what's your position?
Right, so Jamie, first of all, congratulations on having such amazing business success. We need more Jamies in Scotland, that's for sure. On the issue of poor law coming out of Holyrood, I'm afraid we specialise at Holyrood in making bad law, and the latest wheeze from the SNP government was, of course, the introduction of the car park tax. And I personally, philosophically, you'll understand, Jamie, I'm against taxes in general, but I understand why my party in government at Westminster introduced a digital sales tax, because there's deep frustration, certainly on my part, about the inequality of arms between traditional retailers and the giant online retailers. And so this was an attempt, I think it was well intentioned, but the problem is that this frustration about the fact that the Googles and the Amazons of this world just don't pay their fair share of tax. In general, it probably needs to be addressed in a different way, because as well intentioned as it was, the effect, the law of unintended consequences kicked in, and you're right. So this hasn't worked, and that is why the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has announced that the digital sales tax will be withdrawn next year. And looked at again, and any attempt to do the kind of thing that the digital sales tax was intended to do needs to be put into the context of the kind of multinational global agreements on taxation that thus far, there's some promising signs in terms of us being able to tackle these huge Leviathan businesses like Google, like Facebook, like Amazon. But yeah. So in answer to your question, that tax has been withdrawn. It needs to be redesigned. It needs to be looked at. There needs to be further discussion with business in general about how it will be implemented.
Okay. So Westminster.
But we need to.
So Westminster goofed, and maybe they wouldn't have.
Peter, that is too top line a comment that Westminster goofed. I think this was done for the best of intentions. Sorry, Jamie was saying something. Maybe we should hear from Jamie as well. Jamie.
I understand the intentions there. It's just, to me, I'm sure a panel and a lot of analysis went into this, and on day one, how they managed to wriggle 100% out of it shows that not a very good job was done.
Yeah. No, that's right, and I think that Jeremy Hunt, his actions announced in the last month confirm that this has not worked the way it was intended to work, and therefore it's best to withdraw it and redesign it and do it on a consultative basis with others. But we do need to do something about the monopolistic platforms that can strangle SMEs so easily.
I think that's why it was classed as, people call it often, the Amazon tax, wasn't it? Because it makes sense.
Yes. The problem is, it didn't tax Amazon. Amazon got off blocks free. Colin, now's your chance to get a few points back.
Well, I do. Again, I'll say I agree with parts that Stephen's saying there. We're all frustrated. Every politician thinks frustrated at the way some of the big multinationals manipulate the residences, the domains, and so on, to be able to avoid paying the legitimate tax that they should be paying from the profits they're making here. And I think genuinely that was an attempt by London to try and regulate that. It is, of course, getting scrapped. The Scottish, 83% of businesses that Amazon and other people just passed the costs on to, passed it on to their consumers. So that was also an unintended consequence. So it's a much more complicated business than you think, and Scotland is obviously looking at whether an online sales tax is an appropriate way to go. But the difficulties are, those that are arguing for an online sales tax are doing it mainly from the point of view of levelling the playing field between town centre retail businesses and so on, and online businesses, because the bricks and mortar feel they're disadvantaged because of the business rates that they have to pay, the high rents they have to pay, whereas comparatively speaking, e-commerce businesses pay much less. So they are pushing very hard for some kind of online sales tax to level that field.
Yeah.
Is that the right thing to do? Is it the right way to go? Will it have the right consequences? I think from the point of view of the Scottish Government, we're at the very beginning of understanding the complexities of an online sales tax and how it would operate. I, for one, who've been looking into some of this, I can't make my mind up as to what is the right way to go, and I'll be good.
Right. Look, can I get an input from Daniel, please?
Yeah. Look. So I mean, I think I recognise both why the Westminster government did it, and I recognise the goof, and it's a classic one. It's not limited to this space. I mean, if you there's for example, exactly the same sorts of things happen when you attempt to tax landlords, they will pass it on to their tenants. It's a classic. I think one thing though that we can and should do, and Colin essentially touched on it, is, I mean, retail pay 20% of non-domestic rates, and it's 10% of the economy. So I actually think we do need quite fundamental reform of non-domestic rates, at the very least a recalibration, so that actually sectors essentially pay their economic fair share in terms of their economic contribution. And I think that would be a starting point. So I think the approach has to be, you're both at that ground level, but I think we also need to recognise that we need international agreement on this. I mean, ultimately, e-commerce is global. And I know that there is the beginnings of those sorts of agreements. We also need to tackle, and I think this goes beyond just the sort of digital point, around the way that multinationals can essentially just offshore their profits and not pay tax here. So I think it's quite complicated. I recognise the frustration, but I also recognise why the mistake was made. But we need an awful lot more action on this.
Okay, and Willie.
I mean, we do need international action, but we shouldn't have to wait on international action before we do something, which is why, to be honest, I think the UK government were right to try something, because we have got a major problem with the tax base. There's a hold on, Peter. There's a massive reduction in the high street base. Local governments, as a result, are facing real pressure, and they are responsible for all the services, that many of which we've been talking about this morning, in terms of local schools and broadband and infrastructure and all those things that local government has a major role to play in advancing. So it is important we get the tax base right. So I think the UK government were right to try this, and they were right to actually pull it and to review it and come back with something else. But we do need something else. And in some ways, hold on, Peter, hold on. What we need to have is a proper consideration of what tax would actually work, because we're taxing a system rather than necessarily individual companies. And the system we were taxing before was bricks and mortar. Now we're taxing something that's online, that's much more difficult to get our head around. And in the end, companies like Amazon will have to look after their supplier chain in order for them to succeed. So it will be important. And I know in an international market, that's incredibly difficult, because they can go all over the place to get their products. But ultimately, if they don't look after their supplier base, they will have major problems in the long run. So we need to do this. Don't think this is the end of the process. We need to do it, and we need to have it working. Otherwise, government will have a problem, but also business will have a problem as well.
Yeah, I mean,
just share this one as well. Sorry, just to say, for those that weren't aware of it, following the deal, I agreed on the digital service tax that's been removed to transition to a global tax system. And then basically this goes on about, there's a link here in the chat that goes on about what's happening here. Where it's something that's also addressed in the report we're about to release on Monday, which is with the gender angle of it on e-commerce as well, because basically I think there was the DST and the OST, and both have all been passed on to small businesses, as we've been talking about. And there's also the high street thing is always argued, but there's costs for online businesses as well. And it comes back to what was discussed earlier, that many people on the high street also have an online presence nowadays, and they also need to drive change into the high street. So I think bigger businesses, there is a need to address what they're earning.
Anne-Marie, every single business that we meet complains about the tax that we're looking to impose, and I understand, and they're fighting their corner. If you talk to the oil and gas sector just now, they are incredibly bitter about the windfall tax. We've talked to landlords earlier on with Daniel, you know, and the new legislation that's coming in round about freezing rents and capping rents, and they're talking about consequences. These are the difficult decisions that we have to make about balancing the different needs. But there's no easy choices with this stuff. We understand the consequences.
Look, there's a clear follow-up needed.
Peter, that's why we're
here
to listen.
I think the bottom line, Peter, is that we as politicians need to face up to the fact, regardless of what colour our rosettes are on election day, that we have got a taxation system on businesses in this country that is not fit for the century we're living in, and doesn't take into account how businesses and the model and the entire global model that we've been addressing for the last hour, how much that has changed just in a decade. And the fact is, the taxation system in this country just needs to be modernised, full stop.
Okay, I'm really going to have to sort of cut this short, because all of these things can be followed up afterwards. But I'd just like to bring us to our final question. And this is from Marsley Mains. Marsley has run her own e-commerce business. She's also worked as an e-commerce manager for a Glasgow company. Now she is studying for a PhD at Strathclyde University. Over to you, Marsley.
Hey there. Firstly, thanks. This is really interesting. So I'm going to throw another wicked problem into the mix, being the challenges of sustainability in e-commerce, where the need to integrate sustainability into e-commerce business models is vital. One great example is Patagonia, which is improving brand loyalty and trust alongside increasing profit. So to go with the discussions before, any education initiative would be essential to consider both sustainability and e-commerce as imperative to put Scotland in an innovative leading position, which leads me to the practicalities that e-commerce fits well with women due to its flexibility with minimal investment to get started, plus the rise of innovative sustainable startups, giving rise the need for support from the Scottish Government. So my question to you is, given that e-commerce is a high productivity way to lower your carbon footprint and the evidence that e-commerce is more female friendly, then I'd like to understand how the Scottish Government could provide better support to the e-commerce sector, including sustainability and women back to work or in work.
Okay, thanks. Perhaps Willie, given your carbon footprint experience.
One of the, I think now, rather than looking to excel in sustainability, I think consumers are increasingly looking for all companies to meet a basic standard. There is I think it's the negative publicity of not being sustainable rather than excelling in sustainability that I think is what customers accept. The problem is that when you're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, despite our best intentions, sometimes people are forced to make choices that are really difficult. So in all of the stuff we've talked about today in terms of tax and training and strategies and targets and data will all help around about the measures that you've just talked about, Marceli. But what's really important is that we do have a modern view about what e-commerce actually is in terms of sustainability, because I suspect most people think it's not sustainable because of the individual transportation of goods. And I think there probably needs to be a communication and education, perhaps from the sector itself, to explain that, because all we see from the sector is vans driving around our streets.
Oh, Willie, can I just make
Peter,
point
Peter, can I finish my sentence and then I'll let you come in?
Okay.
And therefore that is the common perception of the sector. That's all we see because it is invisible. It's not on the high street. So there perhaps needs to be. You're probably right about the sustainability credentials of the sector, but I'm not sure that's how the public perceive it.
Yeah,
I'm just sharing some stats online as well.
Thank you.
E-commerce is actually more sustainable than bricks and mortar based on the stats that are coming out in our report on Monday. And it explains a bit more about, I mean, it's all together to do with trying to amalgamate deliveries into the one place and various other things that are in place. China has been quite good at this as an example. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks for that. Daniel, what's your view?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a little technology glitch there. My computer every now and again wants to switch what speakers and microphone it uses. Look, I think one of the problems is that question is about 3 questions in one. So I think there's a point there about sustainability. I think there's a point there about e-commerce and actually as in how we help that. And I think there's a point about women in business and e-commerce. And I think I'll try and answer each of those things briefly. I think Willie's absolutely right about having to recognize where we are. I mean, I really worry about the sustainability agenda full stop, because I think right now most businesses are just trying to figure out how they can survive the next 12 months. Businesses are facing, essentially there's a bit of a cliff edge in the spring when the help with utilities ends. And a lot of businesses have, given the timings of their electricity and utility deals coming up, it will just almost completely bypass them. If your deal's up in March or April, it's kind of, well, it's neither here nor there. And if you're, and I've seen some of the quotes that some of my local businesses are getting, and when you're faced with that, 5-6-fold increases in bills, it's a bit difficult to think about the broader sustainability agenda. So I think there's a role here for government as we think through this to actually, I think, make the sustainability steps clear and also directly relate them to cost base. Because I think the two are absolutely intertwined. So there's a lot more to unpack there, but I think ultimately breaking it down and being clear about both impacts on sustainability, but clearly impacts on bottom line for businesses, I think is absolutely vital. Look, in terms of helping understanding about kind of the opportunities of e-commerce and about the ease of setting up, I think absolutely. I think we need to, do a lot better as almost sort of helping people with an approach that has, e-commerce in a box. And a lot of that stuff is already out there. It doesn't need to be provided by government. It's about signposting people to it. Like I say, I mean, you could literally set up an e-commerce site inside half an hour if you, it's the content that's going to be the barrier, not the technology. And then finally, I think that, this point, I mean, the fact that we're all blokes trying to answer these questions is a bit, let's just recognize that's a bit hopeless to begin with.
Except for me, I'm the one woman on the panel that can
more women into this. The understanding about how technology and e-commerce can help them do that is needs to be absolutely embedded within that. And and actually those flexibilities are useful for all sorts of people who might have otherwise found it difficult to start a business. Are we maximizing that? No. And I think unless we actually, have approaches which are focused and fine-tuned to those needs of those particular groups, and women in particular, we're not really going to make most of them. So hopefully those are 3 very brief answers, but hopefully that covers the...
Appreciate the brevity, Daniel, and even greater brevity from Stephen, and then followed by Colin. If you just
Stephen, do brevity. I'm not sure you can.
I'm not very sure if I can. But I agree with what's been said about the gender gap. I mean, there are literally hundreds of billions of pounds that we're missing out as an economy because of the fact that we do not engage adequately with that entrepreneurial flair that is absolutely there among the women population of our country. And just want to say this, Peter, that in response to how do you get behind the challenge of that gender gap, how do you engage with more women and girls in terms of entrepreneurship? And I'm afraid I will go straight back to school, because I think we need to be teaching entrepreneurship at school. We need to be engaging young people in what that all means, and how they can take a piece of that, and
training.
And our young people are the key. And when it comes to sustainability, they are the crusaders for a cleaner world, where clean growth is at the heart of all of our economic development. And if you marry that together, then what we should be doing is focusing our investment in these areas, primarily on the youngest members of our society.
I appreciate the brevity.
Okay, that was an attempt at brevity.
Okay, Colin.
Yes, I think e-commerce still has a problem on its sustainability side. We shouldn't fool ourselves that it's clean and green, because as has already been highlighted, you've got the vans running around the street all over the place delivering, and even if they're electric.
It can be electric vans though, Colin.
Yeah, I was just saying that even electric vans, there's controversy about how green they actually are. Packaging, I mean, some of the stuff I buy online, the packaging is absolutely dreadful, with polystyrene and plastics and goodness knows what else.
True.
However, Colin, sorry to interrupt on the packaging. Jo Chidley, for example, her beauty kitchen has just started which is she's supplying some really big customers like the likes of Unilever with packaging, Marks and Spencer, Lush, Unilever, and it developed from her e-commerce business, seeing what the customer-driven demand for sustainability. So now she's supplying packaging that's sustainable.
Excellent.
Sorry, I really need to...
I wish more of our packaging ended up at my door.
It's Amazon that have got the big boxes.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also the question of the startup and the startup support that can be given. Now, I'm open to correction, but off the top of my head, I think about 34% of startups are female, and that's quite low. And usually, it's into small retail businesses that they're starting up. I think there could be better support there. I think our enterprise agencies could play a greater role in assisting women into business. And I think there's a lot more of it. A lot more can be explored around that. It's good that there's lower overheads, no high street bricks and mortars and so on, and all the costs that go with that. Training is an issue, I think, for everybody, women included. Training, I think we've highlighted tonight, is crucial and isn't happening at the level that we need to be able to sustain e-commerce at a level we'd like to see in Scotland. So there is a great deal to be done here, and I don't think it's a level playing field in any manner or means at the moment, but we can move towards it, and we are moving towards it. It's just a question of the speed, and as Daniel highlighted, the difficulties we've got at the moment, where most companies and businesses are in survival mode, is not going to help, because you're not going to get somebody's attention on sustainability and net zero and so on when they don't know if they're going to be able to pay their electricity bill.
Can I, before we wrap up, can I just pass back to Willie for a final comment on this?
No, I don't have anything else.
Okay. How about Marsley? How did you feel that the group answered?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. I think, to be honest, everybody's on the same page there. It comes back to innovation and support, and you know, and anything that can be done to help both. And I mean, you know, there's obviously things like, fine, we've got the cost of living crisis, but that doesn't mitigate the real challenges for our future generations. Which, as challenging as it is, there are things that we can be doing in our marketing messages to educate and have people being aware. And if we are in a cost of living crisis, you know, sorry to say it, but, you know, there's elements of buying less, being aware of what consumption is in the first place.
Marsley, that's a lovely place to finish. We have a final poll so that the people who are still with us, Anne-Marie, do you want to push up the final poll? And this is really a bit of feedback for
based on MSP's answers, how well do you think Holyrood understands the role of e-commerce or internet retail in Scotland's economy? We have 8, say a little. 3, better than expected. 4, better than expected. Oh, one's impressed. That was an MP that did that vote, I think, an MSP.
I've not done mine yet.
6, better than expected.
But no one's impressed. Oh no, some people are impressed now.
There's
Good.
2.
Yeah, that was me.
One
Thank
person.
you to you who are impressed.
Just to clarify,
I
the
think your
MSPs are
expectations
not,
must have been very
you're
low.
not able to vote twice, MSPs, so you know it's fine. You can all only vote once.
Oh
Look,
dear.
Okay, while people are doing that, I mean, as Anne-Marie made clear at the start, we had to select from a large number of questions that were asked, a small subset that we failed to get through within the hour, but we are where we are. So if we can, if people can put questions into Slido, and we'll take it from there because we have a way to rank question quality if other people want
These
to
are
go
the
along with
questions
it.
coming in just now, and they're ranked.
Yeah. So maybe we can go through these. I don't know if you want to lead on this, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, we can start. Well, we'll just read through them perhaps, and then if you want to add to it, you can come on. Colleges, Kate Little says, colleges developed a fast track to e-commerce course, which was poorly marketed. Are we at risk of trying to wait for perfection before rolling something out?
Any MSPs can comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we are. I mean, we can't hang around. I mean, actually, there's all sorts of areas. You know, we're at the tightest labour market that we've experienced in certainly 50 years. And you know, and I think yes, we need to do better. But you know, taking long, convoluted reviews isn't. You know, and some of these things, I think people in this meeting will know that there are some key skills, key points which are and those are known. So I think we need some. Yes, we need some longer, more considered views, but we also need some rapid reaction where there are key skill shortages.
I think there's nothing wrong with building things. You know, there's a saying in business about building it as you fly it, and I think sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. But as long as you're prepared to learn the lessons as you go along, as we've seen in the digital sales tax experience, try something. Obviously, didn't work the way it was intended. Try something different. There's nothing wrong with that as long as we're honest about the fact that we do not have, particularly as politicians, we do not have all of the answers, and it's better to be honest about this.
Yeah.
Anne-Marie, on to the next, maybe.
Next one. Okay, next question. Okay, so Kate's is done. Tick. Craig, I think there is a place for modern apprenticeships. I have a team member who is doing an MA in marketing and learning on the job, covers e-commerce and funded. What are your views on that? I think Marianne, you would have views on that one as well, because I know you've seen that abroad. Marianne, I don't know if you want to add to that quickly.
Yeah, I would love to. And quite frankly, but Switzerland is a small country, same population as Scotland, roughly. We probably have a handful more people, but we have less space than we have here in Scotland. Apprenticeships is still the first and foremost chosen career for a craft, or in principle, people go do an apprenticeship more so than they do a university degree.
Yeah, it would be good if we could, it would be good if we get to that in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely.
Frankly,
yeah.
I think I understand why certain policies were made by Tony Blair's government in particular about increasing the number of places at university and having an ambition about 50%. But frankly, I think that was another good intention policy that needs to be revisited. And there is a disparity of esteem between apprenticeships, university, college, going into employment with vocational training. And that we need to revisit all of those attitudes because they're so out of date.
So I'd go further than that because I'd agree with that, but I think we need to really break down a lot of barriers between modern apprenticeships and other things. Yeah. I mean that in 3 key ways. So first of all, I think actually the distinction between university and modern apprenticeship needs to be broken down. We've made some good steps with degree apprenticeships, but we also need to recognise the level of funding between a degree and an apprenticeship is, I mean, it's chalk and cheese, and that's one of the big components in Swiss. It's just much better funded. Yeah. Totally then also, I think that we need to ensure that you can't do any tertiary education without there being a solid vocational element at least available to you.
Yeah.
I would like to see sort of skills being made available, to history and English, undergraduates, so that they can do, whether it's technology, finance, project management, a bit like the way that we offer modern languages as extracurriculars at higher education. And then finally, we also need to make, I think, the MAs more agile and nimble. I think there's a lot of, both in terms of the age profile, so we need to remove the age caps, but also recognize that some businesses, again, it comes back to they have point expertise or skills gaps, and sometimes they want to fill those rather than, put someone through a full MA. So could we modularize MAs, for example? And that'd be one of the things that I'd be very keen to discuss.
I'd also like to see apprenticeships blended into the senior phase of secondary schools. So the word apprenticeships becomes much more part of our educational currency, because it isn't sufficiently the case at the minute.
Okay. Anyone else with a point on that?
Can I just add to this, if I may? There's another element that I recognize. We need to support entrepreneurs that are willing to take an apprentice.
Yes.
So we can't just say, oh yeah, I take an apprentice, and then the poor person goes off, and what do we do? And the boss has got no time, nor it's so tight. I think we need to go from both angles.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a problem in SMEs.
That's an excellent point.
Okay.
SMEs. Okay.
Stephen.
Okay. Anne-Marie, next.
Okay, next question. Okay,
just read it out.
This is a good one. To say retail shops pay more than online is not true. Many online businesses work from rented space and have to pay rates. What are your views on that one?
So I think this comes from my comment. So look, this is pure. I think that's correct. I don't think it contradicts what I was saying earlier. So what I was saying is purely based on the current rateable categories, is looking at the proportion that comes from the retail sector, and it is 20%, and that will include online retailers as well. So that's where that proportion comes from. So I don't think it's actually a straight contradiction, and of course it's a correct observation.
Okay. I think you've got to take into account the fact that most e-commerce retailers are out of town. They're in out of town sites that require less rental, and the rates are usually much lower.
Yeah.
And maybe that is one way to redistribute and to support our town centres. And I'm just throwing this out here as an option. Maybe you reduce the rates in the town centres and increase the rates in the out of town units. I don't know.
To be honest, I think what we need is a new category in our non-domestic rates, so that you have essentially what might be warehouse, but that's actually being used for customer fulfillment. I think it's a distinct class now, and I think that might be a way of doing it.
And I think this also illustrates a point I tried to raise earlier, that tinkering with elements of our tax system is not going to do the trick. We actually need to have a fresh look at the whole issue of business taxation in the whole.
Okay, I'm going to jump to the next question if we've got time, Pete, for a couple more.
Yeah.
So this one's just I'm going to get rid of, because just relevant comments. Business admin and HNC courses don't fit the bill. We need to encompass logistics, finance, operations, marketing, etc. I totally agree. I think Daniel mentioned this before as well. We need to move on because it's Black Friday. We've got to get back to work. Yes, good point. There's no MBA for e-commerce in Scotland. Can we focus more on helping companies from 1 million to 100 million? Exactly. I'd like to go to this one. Should Scotland leverage remote working more to encourage digital workers' skills to the country? Live in Scotland, work everywhere, contribute locally. Does anyone have any views on that one?
That's the route to the salvation of our. But in essence, that is the route to the salvation for our rural economy. That it becomes a digital economy in the fullest possible sense, both in terms of remote working and also in terms of e-commerce.
And that comes down to the logistics and the infrastructure, but also e-commerce. Exactly. Yeah. To teach them e-commerce so they can actually build a business and get their products out into the international market.
That's why we should have a rural first strategy around infrastructure investment, because that's where the greatest need is. In cities, often commercial entities will take care of that. For example, I mentioned Stirling earlier. City Fibre came in a partnership with Vodafone and they did all that work because it was commercially viable in a small city like Stirling. It's not going to be viable in rural rural Scotland.
Okay. I think I think a lot of these points have been already, all the key points have been brought up, they've been covered in questions.
And I just thank the person that thinks that I should be returned to Westminster. I think that is fabulous.
I agree.
And if
that was you, Stephen.
We'll cut down the points of order we have in the chamber. Good idea.
Okay. Well, look. I think we need to bring this to a close, but we're not actually bringing the subject to a close. I think the overarching lesson here is that skills and training just comes up all the time. About 40% of all the questions asked fell into that category. It's not being done right, and this shouldn't be taken as a criticism. These are all opportunities, for Scotland. To do things better. We're a wee nation, so hopefully the lines of communication between the e-commerce sector and the business people in it, and the politicians who help set strategy and the tone for what we want to achieve as a country, can be done. We just need to shorten these lines of communication and make sure that all of these things are thought through, so that we don't goof on
just showing our poll results, the final results as a summary as well here. 30 in favour of e-commerce being a sector, 3 against. This one, GST against, 23 against OST, 15 in favour, 2 and 2. And our final one, do they understand the e-commerce and Scotland's economy? 14 say a little, 6 say better than expected. 3 are wow impressed. I think they're the MSPs.
Only 3 of them voted.
2 not at all. Right.
Anyway, hopefully, people will be able to sort of share people's email addresses, so that they can get in contact with people, and hopefully, this has been an actionable event. Where there are some specific things that we can all do to maybe make things a bit better.
And just to kick off the MSPs training, the e-commerce report from W20 UK is being released on Monday. I will send you all a copy.
Okay.